Sorry, I'm trying to get share my screen. That's it. Okay. King Arthur. So, King Arthur, or the once and future king, is an epic and timeless tale with its key themes of magic, chivalric brotherhood, courtly love, in fact, and the eternal quest for the Holy Grail, set in a lost golden age. And the Arthur legend has become one of the most potent, successful, and well-known stories in world mythology. But in reality, there are two separate and discrete Arthurs. There's the fictional king, whose life is retold and reinvented for every generation. And then there's the historical figure, whose story we assume originates in the chaos of post-Roman Britain, sometime in the 5th or 6th century. So if we go back to the earliest source material, we have Gildas, who wrote his, everybody's heard of this, haven't they? There is Diexio, whatever, Conquesta Britanniae. The real problem of uncovering any real King Arthur is the lack of reliable contemporary source material. This is the best text of the period. It's called On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain, and it was by a 6th century sermon writer called Gildas. So round about the time Arthur's supposed to have lived. Gildas depicts a period of anarchy and violence in which the degenerate and demoralized Britons are ultimately cowed by their pagan Saxon foe. Unfortunately, there's no mention of Arthur, although he does praise a successful general called Ambrosius Aurelianus, to whom he credits the victory at Mount Badon, a battle thought to have occurred between Celtic Britons and Anglo-Saxons in the late 5th or early 6th century. Nobody exactly knows where it was supposed to have taken place. There's been several claims, but none proven. Gildas's work, though, is not a history, it's a religious polemic. And basically, he was given a sermon with the Britons presented as God's chosen people, and he compares them to the Israelites in the Old Testament, and it's intended to condemn tyrants and the clergy, and it laments how corrupt and tyrannical Britain has become. In the 9th century, the history of the Britons. This has been attributed to another monk called Ninius. Now in this, a character appears called Arthur. He's described as Dux Bellorum, which translates roughly to general or commander or something like that. And it's said in this that he was the acclaimed victor of 12 battles. Now, the names of these battles are garbled and mixed up and difficult to interpret. And in some cases, historians have decided that they've been duplicated. But one particular one stands out, Badon Hill. And here we are told Arthur carried the image of the Holy Mary on his shoulders. Presumably, it means he had a shield on his shoulder. Nobody quite knows. And in that battle, he single-handedly killed 960 men. The best we can say about this Historia Britannium is it's dubious with its historical accuracy. It also has mythical figures portrayed as well as historical ones. But what we have is the concept of Arthur being an actual historical figure round about the beginning of the 8th century. Then we have Geoffrey of Monmouth, another 300 years later. And this is the first time we get the whole life history of King Arthur. This is called, his book was, his manuscript was The History of the Kings of Britain. Now, this goes all the way back to the founding of Britain by Brutus, who came from Troy. So take that as you will. And this one features all of Arthur's battles, which is basically taken from Ninnius. But it adds other details to it. It says that Arthur was born or conceived at Tintagel in Cornwall. His mother and father were Uther Pendragon and Igerna, and he carried a sword called Caliburn, not Excalibur. And he struggled and fought against his enemies across Europe, not only in Britain. And in the story, Geoffrey also outlines Arthur's love for Guinevere, who later became Guinevere, and the epic bravery of his band of brothers, and then his final treachery of Mordred, who deals Arthur a mortal blow at the Battle of Camblan, and then his body is conveyed to Avalon. Now, Arthur, in Geoffrey's telling, is a bloodthirsty warlord, quick to anger, slays the innocent. He's an empire builder who conquers Norway and France, amongst other places. And actually, he's not a very likable chap. So, a bit later on, we get the legend growing with Chetrien de Troyes. I hope I'm pronouncing these right. So, the history of the kings of Britain had set the template, and later writers came along reflecting the times they were living in. So Geoffrey's history was influential, and then afterwards there was loads of other publications right across continental Europe. But the French poet Chetrien de Troyes introduced the concept of courtly love to the myth, and he helped shift the emphasis away from the blood-soaked warrior to the actual courtly love and chivalric ideals. The most potent of all Chetrien's additions was the introduction of Lancelot and his adulterous relationship with Queen Guinevere. Then, of course, there was Percival, whose quest for the Holy Grail inspired poets and novelists and artists, filmmakers ever since. And the quest for the Holy Grail became significant later on by the works of another Frenchman, Robert de Boron. And then the Round Table was a later addition by a Norman poet called Wace. So we have all the different pieces all put together now. So who are they? The first one is Guinevere. So according to Geoffrey of Monmouth, like I said, she's called Guinevere, and she was romanticized in the 12th century. And there she is being portrayed by various people, women, in various films. There's Cherry Lumley in Excalibur, and Keira Knightley with her thing. I don't know who the rest are really, but there you go. And then there's Mordred. Again, that's from Excalibur. And Mordred was the treacherous nephew. He was actually based on a 1st century BCE king, Ambrosius of Trevonites in Essex, who was a prince who betrayed his uncle to Julius Caesar. Then we have the famous Lancelot. There's no Lancelot in the earliest accounts of Arthur. And in the early accounts, Guinevere or Guinevere actually committed adultery with Mordred. So they sort of moved that around a bit. And we have Merlin. It's interesting that the way he's portrayed in the medieval one there, there's some sort of devil type thing. In the early accounts of Arthur, Merlin and Arthur never meet. Merlin is the chief advisor to Arthur's father, Uther, and his uncle, who then became Ambrosius Aurelianus. Then we get the Knights of the Round Table. This was added in the 12th and 13th century because the concept of a brotherhood of knights appealed to the medieval concept of liberty, of chivalry, not liberty. They didn't have that one. The Holy Grail, again added in the late 12th century, and the quest for the Holy Grail adds to that sense of chivalry and the religious destiny to the story of Arthur. Then there's a sword in the stone. There's no mention of this sword in the stone in the early accounts again. In the early accounts, Arthur simply inherits the kingdom from his father, Uther. But named swords have always played an important part in Celtic folklore. So as I said, his original sword was Caliburn, and then at some point got changed to Excalibur. But the Lady in the Lake, Sword in the Stone, that was all later additions. So that's the basis of the legend of King Arthur, which has been used over the years. So if we go back to Geoffrey's Kings of Britain, this is a map of what he thought Arthur, all the blue is where Arthur, Iceland, he had a big empire, apparently. That's all. Oh, nope. That's his big empire that he had in dark and light blue, according to Geoffrey. Even contemporary chroniclers of at Geoffrey's time attacked his work as being totally fictional. William of Newburgh said everything that Geoffrey says is made up, is lies. He has a love of lying. And until recently, later historians have generally followed the view of Geoffrey's work. But recently, some historians have gone back, especially a guy called Miles Russell, who is actually an archaeologist, who's gone back to the actual history of the kings and re-examined it to find if there are historical reference points. So, Geoffrey was writing at the time of the civil war in England between Empress Matilda and King Stephen. I won't go into the whys and wherefores of that because it's a bit of a complicated thing, but basically they were fighting over the crown. And Geoffrey's warlord, Arthur, would have fitted in well with the times of that because there was lots of different barons going round, and the actual period was called the Anarchy. And also, Arthur fought against the Saxons, which would have appealed to his Norman overlords. So we got Geoffrey's book, and is laying the ground for the old Arthurian cycle. And it includes stories of legendary sites like Stonehenge. This is a picture showing Merlin, who is involved in the building of Stonehenge, apparently. There's old King Cole, King Lear. No, yeah, is that King Lear? Yeah, that's King Lear. Tintagel, and that is Cymbeline, which was later made famous by Shakespeare, as was King Lear. So, as I said, Geoffrey's work was universally derided because a lot of it is clearly fictitious. It's full of wizards, magic and dragons. And it also has this lineage of Arthur. He is at the bottom. So this is all his supposed family. There's Uther, Aurelius Ambrosia, Constantine, right the way up to old King Cole at the top there. So this is all based on Geoffrey's book. There's Mordred or Madreus. Again. So what the people have done is gone back to Geoffrey's book, and they've tried to demonstrate that it isn't just simple work of make-believe, a simple work of fiction. But on the contrary, there's sufficient evidence to suggest that his text was in fact compiled from a variety of early British sources, including oral folklore, king's lists, dynastic tables, bardic praise poems, and some of which date back to the 1st century BC. So what Geoffrey did is he created a single unified account, and he did exercise a significant degree of editorial control over his material, and he sort of massaged things and smoothed out chronological inconsistencies to fit. But if you accept that Geoffrey's book is not just a single narrative, but a mass of unrelated stories threaded together, individual elements can successfully be identified and reinstated in their correct time and place. And this has repercussions for the legend of Arthur. Because if you do that, it's clear that he cannot really have existed. Because Arthur in the Historia is the ultimate composite figure. There's nothing in Arthur's story that is truly original. And in fact, there are 5 discrete characters that you can pick out in the big mix of Arthur's legend. And once you detach their stories from the narrative, there's not much left. So, the chronological hook on which Geoffrey hung his story of Arthur is Ambrosius Aurelianus, who makes up about 16% of the story. He was a late 5th century warlord from whom the youthful coronation, the capture of York from the Saxons, and the Battle of Baden Hill is taken wholesale, and he is the core of the myth. Next comes Arvirargus. Arvirargus. I cannot say this. Arvirargus. Arvirargus. I don't know. He represents 24% of Arthur's life. He was a British king from the 1st century AD. And in the Historia, Arthur's subjugation of the Orkneys and his return home and marriage to Ganhomara parallels that of this earlier king who supposedly did exactly that, and then married Genvisa on his return south. The link being that both were considered the most beautiful women in the British Isles or in Britain. Then we have Constantine the Great. He's got an 8%. In CE 306, he was proclaimed Roman Emperor in York. So, and he had, as it says there, emerged victorious in the civil wars. And then combine him with Magnus Maximus, who's got a chunky 39%. He was a usurper from 383 CE, and him and Constantine took troops from Britain to fight against the armies of Rome. Constantine defeated the Emperor Maxentius, and Maximus killed the Emperor Gratian, and both advanced towards Italy. And both these feats are duplicated in Arthur's story. So the final bit is Cassivellaunus. King Arthur's story recounts or repeats some of his story. He was a tribal leader from the 1st century BC, who in Geoffrey's version of events was betrayed by his treacherous nephew, Ambrosius, the prototype for Mordred. And if you add all those up, that just leaves 1% of Geoffrey's story of Arthur unaccounted for. And that comprises the invasion of Iceland and Norway. And what's been thought is that this is just basic wish fulfillment, because of what had happened in previous centuries from the Vikings. So Arthur is really just a composite Celtic superhero. He's an amalgam of all the other people put together and exaggerated. But his literary and artistic success ultimately lies in the way various generations have reshaped the basic stories to suit themselves, and making Arthur a hero to rich and poor, elite and revolutionary alike. Because the absence of a clear origin for Arthur has created a void where people can put whatever they want to fill it in. So the Normans were only too happy to be associated with Arthur. And then later there was the discovery of the remains of Arthur and Guinevere at Glastonbury. This is in 1191. This is now thought to be an elaborate hoax because the monastery was suffering financial difficulties at the time. But later, Edward I, Longshanks, consciously cultivated this association with the mythical figure of Arthur and the trappings of chivalric culture as a means of justifying and assisting his conquest within Britain. And he later organised and presided over a lavish occasion which, amidst much pomp and ceremony, the remains of Arthur and his queen were reinterred in a position of honour at the foot of the abbey's high altar. He also organised round table events which lasted several days and involved jousting, feasting and dancing. And in those, the participants often dressed as figures from the Arthurian legend. Now, Edward I's grandson, Edward III, further developed this idea of the round table And whereas Edward I's events lasted a few days, it was the intention of Edward III to develop a permanent round table. Edward was an enthusiastic jouster and spent most of his reign when he wasn't in France, taking part in tournaments in England and on the continent. And Edward announced his plans to found a round table of the same kind and status that was once used by King Arthur, and a special hall was commissioned to house it. So with an ongoing war against the French king, for Edward to style himself as a successor to King Arthur, who had conquered and subdued the French, clearly had strong political motives. In the middle of the 15th century, Sir Thomas Malory wrote Morte d'Arthur, the definitive English version of the story of King Arthur. It has been suggested that the figure of Arthur may well be interpreted as a tribute to Henry V, as Malory was known to have Lancastrian sympathies. And Henry V was his father had usurped the throne from Richard II. And Malory adds details which makes Arthur's expedition against the Romans resemble Henry V's campaign in France by altering the itinerary of Arthur. And the work was written at the time when there was a dynastic dispute directed against Henry V. The Lancastrian rulers at the time. And the connection between Henry and Arthur would have been seen as very advantageous for the Lancastrians. At the founding of the Tudor dynasty near the end of the 15th century, the figure of Arthur was again used for propaganda purposes. In contrast to the early Plantagenet monarchs who manipulated Arthurian relics to subdue the Welsh, Henry VII, or Henry Tudor, who was to become Henry VII, emphasised his Welsh ancestry to claim he was the leader as prophesied at the conclusion of Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia that would make England great again. Henry laid claim to an ancient British lineage that stretched back to Brutus, again, he's the founder of Britain, and Arthur, and he fashioned a coat of arms that displayed the dragon which Arthur was associated with. And in 1486, he named his first son Arthur, and he was made Prince of Wales in 1489. And the pageantry around that was very obviously aimed at links between Henry and his prince and King Arthur. And Henry VIII continued with this. He commissioned the redecoration of the Winchester Round Table as part of his own propaganda campaign. Now that guy, John Dee, he was astrological and scientific advisor to Queen Elizabeth from 1550s to 1570s. He actually served as an advisor to England's voyages of discovery, and he convinced Elizabeth that the early Britons, including King Arthur, had in fact visited the New World, and therefore the English had an unquestionable right of conquest to create a British Empire. He was the first person to use the term British Empire. So basically, we can go across the New World and do what we like, because Arthur got there first. So in recent years, there's been a big upsurge in conspiracy theories, and also this has affected the King Arthur legend. you know, you've got works in pop culture like the Da Vinci Code and everything. And there's been new books and articles and television programs that claim to us discover the lost truth of King Arthur or expose new aspects of his identity. Most of them are pretty delusional, but again, the quest is there, and the void that is King Arthur they're able to pour into that. So, and he's appeared in lots of films, of course. There's just 3 of them, all based on the Arthur legend. I always thought Alan Ladd looked a bit daft in that sort of tank toppy type thing, but there you go. So you've got the Black Knight, Siege of the Saxons, and the latest King Arthur. And on TV, you've got the various. That's Arthur Askey, who did a version of King Arthur in the wartime. God knows what that's like. I don't see that. And this is one that me and Anne-Marie took our grandson to see. It's this kid who's the new King Arthur, what's he called? The kid who would be king or something like that. And also he's appeared in the Doctor Who. And this at the top, which I've forgotten. Oh, that's one of the, that's an old King Arthur series from TV. So that's King Arthur for you. And if this works, we'll see. Can you hear this or not? No?
No, can't hear it.
Okay.
You've got to share audio or something, Steve.
Yeah, I should have done that before I started. Oh, well, never mind. Oh, hang on. No, I can't find it. Never mind.